It's never long before a National Park Service ranger or a battlefield guide gets the dreaded question, why are all battles fought in national parks? Well, of course they're not. They're fought in places like this, in open fields, on farms, in people's backyards, around cities, and they were usually fought to accomplish a particular objective. You are trying to capture an enemy's army. You are trying to capture a critical or strategic position. You are trying to gain supplies. You are trying to cut off an enemy army if possible. There are a bunch of reasons why these things are fought, but they would end up in these engagements. They could be small, they could be large. The Civil War is fought in 10,000 different places, of which about 400 of them are seen by Congress as key engagements. And it is these 400 battlefields or so that the Civil War Trust and other preservation groups really work to preserve today. In the decades following the Civil War, veterans came back to the battlefields on which they fought. This was hallowed ground. This is where they had done their great deeds, where they exhibited every human emotion, bravery, cowardice, fear, exhilaration. They would come back to these places, and often they were coming back to farmers' fields. Sometimes they were coming back to people's backyards. But increasingly, as the decades went on, they were actually going back to battlefield parks, starting in 1863, and then much more in the 1880s and 1890s. Land was actually being preserved where soldiers could come and reflect and commemorate and actually erect monuments and hold reunions. This really reached its golden age in the 1890s when the federal government created national military parks, places like Vicksburg and Chickamauga and Gettysburg and Shiloh and Antietam, to later to be added by places like Harper's Ferry and here where we stand at Spotsylvania. The veterans came back and really made these battlefields. They put in monuments. They drove stakes into the ground as to where important deeds had taken place. To be sure, more battlefields were preserved into the middle of the 20th century. However, with Civil War veterans dying off, with World War being fought, with the war in Korea, things had really died off in terms of preservation, but the Civil War Centennial really placed a lot of emphasis upon the Civil War. People were remembering and commemorating the Civil War and really trying to refigure out what had happened. As the Civil War Centennial ended and the Vietnam War heated up and people had really just, again, had enough of war. They had enough about thinking about war, seeing movies about war, and battlefield preservation really died off at that point. And so did Civil War scholarship to a degree. You are going to have a rebirth of interest in the Civil War and its preservation really in the 1980s, where Civil War roundtables are growing. Publications about the Civil War are thriving. The movie Glory comes out. Eventually the Ken Burns series comes out and 40 million people watch that particular series, and the modern battlefield preservation movement is born. There are a bunch of local groups, and that is also when the Civil War Trust's predecessor organizations are born, and you are going to have battlefield preservation thrive on a scale that it hadn't since the 1890s. The federal government has saved in total around 75,000 acres of battlefield land, and they've done that over the last century or so. The Civil War Trust has saved about 40,000 acres in the last 15 years. Once these battlefields were preserved as places, veterans and their families came to visit, and eventually their descendants would come to visit these places. And this is important. It's important to not forget your history, and it's really hard to understand what happened at a place without the battlefield, the primary source, the most primary source of all. When combined with photographs and accounts and early maps, you can really only understand a battle when you can stand there and look at what happened where. When you go to a battlefield, there are earthworks not only where the soldiers fought, but they were built by the soldiers. They're exactly where they placed them. And those earthworks, those lunettes, the views described from certain heights over toward other ridges, those are the things the soldiers wrote about. Those are the things you can stand there and read their words and understand what they were talking about. A battlefield provides an experience that nothing else can. There's no set way for people to engage with battlefields. I, as a battlefield guide, have seen every range of emotion as I've been leading battlefield tours. People get sad. People get happy at things like victory. They brim with pride. They lash out. They pass out. People on battlefields, some don't have a great interest in the Civil War, but they look at trees and they bird watch and do all sorts of things. And the veterans knew this. They created battlefields as rural parks in some cases, and battlefields of today are created more as interpretive experiences. But that is up to the visitor. People come to these places. They come to understand American history, the Civil War, and that particular battlefield a little bit better.